The relentless summer sun beat down on Helena Turner as she wiped the sweat from her brow, her gaze fixed on the broken wagon wheel that had finally given up after miles of rough terrain. The vast Wyoming landscape stretched before her like an endless ocean of golden grass, beautiful but unforgiving. She was still 3 days from Cheyenne, according to her calculations, and now this. Fate had a cruel sense of humor. Helena had left Boston 3 weeks ago with dreams of starting anew. At 24, she was considered by many to be firmly on the shelf, too independent and opinionated for proper society. When her aunt passed away, leaving her a modest inheritance, Helena had seized the opportunity to escape the suffocating expectations of her family. Her plan was straightforward: travel west and establish a small schoolhouse in Wyoming territory where education was scarce but desperately needed. "Come on," she muttered, giving the broken wheel a gentle kick. Her supplies were dwindling, and the water barrel was down to its last quarter. The 2 horses she'd purchased in Omaha shifted restlessly, sensing her distress. Helena shaded her eyes and surveyed the horizon. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles away, she could make out what appeared to be a homestead. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney, and she could see the outlines of a barn and corral. It was her only hope. "Well, boys," she said to the horses, "it seems we have a bit of a walk ahead of us." She unhitched the animals from the wagon and gathered what she could carry: a small bag with her personal belongings, the remaining water, and a few provisions. Leading the horses by their reins, she set off toward the distant ranch, praying whoever lived there would be willing to help a stranger. The journey took nearly an hour. As she drew closer, Helena could see it was a modest but well-maintained cattle ranch with a 2-story log house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. A split-rail fence encircled the property, and beyond it, she could see cattle grazing on the open range. Helena pushed open the gate and approached the house, her legs aching from the walk. Before she reached the porch, the front door swung open and a man stepped out, rifle in hand but pointed downward. "That's far enough, madam," he called, his voice deep and cautious. "State your business." Helena stopped, raising her hands slightly. "My wagon broke down about 2 miles east of here. The wheel split completely. I'm hoping you might be able to help me repair it." The man studied her for a moment, then propped his rifle against the porch post and descended the steps. He was tall, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who worked hard for a living. His face was tanned from years under the sun, with fine lines around his eyes that suggested he was in his early 30s. Dark hair peeked out from beneath his hat, and a short beard covered his jaw. "You traveled all this way alone?" he asked, approaching her and the horses. Helena lifted her chin. "I did. I'm perfectly capable." A hint of amusement flickered across his face. "Clearly. That's why you're standing in my yard with a broken wagon." Helena felt her cheeks flush with irritation. "The wagon served me well from Omaha until now. I simply need assistance with repairs, and I'm happy to pay for your time and materials." The man removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "I'm Lucas Vaughn. This is my ranch." "Helena Turner," she replied with a small nod. "I'm on my way to Cheyenne." Lucas glanced at the sky. "It'll be dark in a few hours. We can head out to your wagon in the morning, see what can be done." He looked back at her, his expression softening slightly. "Seems like fate brought you here, Miss Turner." Helena didn't believe in fate, but she wasn't about to argue with the man offering her help. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I appreciate your kindness." "Don't thank me yet," he said, turning toward the house. "Wheel repairs take time. You might be stuck here longer than you'd like." Helena followed him, leading the horses. "I'm sure I'll manage." As they approached the house, Lucas called out, "Miguel." We have a visitor who needs to stable her horses." A young man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He nodded at Lucas's instructions and came to take the horse's reins from Helena. "Miguel Rodriguez is my foreman," Lucas explained. "Best horseman in 3 counties." Miguel tipped his hat to Helena. "Señorita, I will take good care of them." "Thank you," Helena said, reluctantly relinquishing the reins. The horses were nearly the last of her worldly possessions now. Lucas gestured toward the house. "Come on in. You look like you could use some water and food." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room contained a large stone fireplace, several sturdy wooden chairs, and a table. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with more volumes than Helena would have expected to find in a cattle rancher's home. "You raid," she observed, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Lucas gave her a sidelong glance. "Just because I raise cattle doesn't mean I can't appreciate literature, Miss Turner." Helena felt herself blush again. "I apologize." "I didn't mean to imply no offense taken," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. He moved to the kitchen area and pumped water into a glass, which he handed to her. "Drink. You look parched." Helena accepted the water gratefully, drinking it down in several long gulps. When she finished, Lucas refilled the glass without asking. "Thank you," she said. "It's been a long day." "I imagine so." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. I'll put together some food." Helena sank into the chair, relief washing over her as she took the weight off her tired feet. She watched as Lucas moved efficiently around the kitchen, slicing bread and cheese and setting out some dried beef. "You cook for yourself?" she asked. Lucas nodded. Miguel's wife, Consuela, comes up from their cabin a few times a week to cook more substantial meals and handle the washing, but I manage the rest. Been on my own a long time. "How long have you had this ranch?" Helena asked, accepting the plate of food he offered. "Going on 8 years now," he replied, sitting across from her with his own plate. "Started with just 50 acres and a dozen head of cattle. Now I've got close to 1,000 acres and 200 head." Helena was impressed despite herself. "That's quite an accomplishment." Lucas shrugged. "Just a lot of hard work and some luck with the weather." He took a bite of his food, studying her. "What's a woman like you doing traveling alone to Cheyenne?" "A woman like me," Helena echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You've got the look and speech of someone from back east." "Boston, if I had to guess." Helena nodded. "You have a good ear." "Yes, I'm from Boston. I'm going to start a school in the Wyoming territory." Lucas's eyebrows rose slightly. "A school teacher out here? Is that so surprising? Education is important everywhere, Mr. Vaughn." "Call me Lucas," he said. "And no, it's not surprising that education matters. It's just surprising to see someone who looks like they belong in a fancy parlor choosing to come teach in frontier country." Helena bristled. "And what exactly do I look like?" Lucas met her gaze directly. "Like someone who's never had to work a day in your life." Helena set down her fork with a sharp click. "I'll have you know that I've been teaching for 6 years. I may not have calluses from roping cattle, but I've worked hard educating children who would otherwise have no chance at bettering their circumstances." Lucas held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I apologize. That was unfair of me." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Helena used the opportunity to observe her host more carefully. Despite his initial gruffness, there was something compelling about Lucas Vaughn. His movements were deliberate and confident, his hands large and capable. When he wasn't scowling, his features were actually quite handsome. "Why Cheyenne?" Lucas finally asked, breaking the silence. Helena sipped her water before answering. "It's growing quickly since the railroad came through. There are families there who need schools for their children, but not enough teachers willing to come this far west." "And you're willing." "I am," she said simply. "I wanted a change." Something in her tone must have resonated with him because Lucas nodded slowly. "I understand that well enough." After they finished eating, Lucas showed Helena to a small bedroom at the back of the house. "It's not much," he said, "but it's clean. Bathrooms down the hall, there's a pump for water." "Thank you," Helena said, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. "This is very kind." Lucas looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some rest. We'll head out at first light to check on your wagon." Helena closed the door after he left and sank onto the narrow bed. Despite her predicament, she felt strangely at peace. Lucas Vaughn might be rough around the edges, but he seemed honorable enough. Tomorrow they would assess the damage to her wagon, and hopefully she'd be back on her way to Cheyenne within a day or two. As she drifted off to sleep, Helena couldn't help but remember Lucas's words when she first arrived. "Seems like fate brought you here." She didn't believe in fate, of course. But as exhaustion claimed her, she had to admit there were worse places to be stranded than Lucas Vaughn's ranch. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the Wyoming plains. Helena woke to the sounds of activity, the distant lowing of cattle, the clanging of metal, and voices calling to one another as the ranch came to life. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the events of the previous day rushed back, and she sat up quickly. She dressed hastily in her traveling clothes, thankful she had thought to bring her small bag with her. After washing her face with the cold water from the pump, she pinned her chestnut hair into a simple bun and headed toward the main room. Lucas was already there, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He glanced up as she entered. "Good morning. Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," Helena replied, accepting the mug he offered. "I apologize for oversleeping. I'm usually up before dawn." "It's barely past dawn now," Lucas said with a slight smile. "And you had a hard day yesterday. Coffee's hot and there's bread and preserves on the table. We'll head out after you've eaten." Helena sat at the table, surprised by his consideration. The bread was fresh, and the preserves wild strawberry from the taste were delicious. Lucas joined her, drinking his coffee in companionable silence. "Have you been in Wyoming territory long?" Helena asked, curious about this taciturn man who had taken her in so readily. Lucas nodded. "Since '65. Came west after the war. You fought in the Civil War?" Helena asked, studying him with new interest. "Union cavalry," he confirmed, his expression revealing little. "When it ended, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts." He drained his coffee and stood. "I'll hitch up the wagon while you finish. There's a canteen on the porch. Make sure you fill it before we leave." Helena watched him go, wondering about the ghosts he'd mentioned. There was more to Lucas Vaughn than the gruff rancher he presented to the world. Half an hour later, they were in Lucas's wagon, heading east across the plains toward where Helena had left her own wagon. The morning was still cool, but Helena could feel the promise of heat in the strengthening sun. Lucas drove with confidence, his hands steady on the reins, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape. "That's Porterville over there," he said, indicating a small collection of buildings several miles to the north. "Not much of a town, but it's where we go for supplies and mail." "Is it named after someone?" Helena asked. "Joshua Porter. Founded the place in '66. He's the only doctor for 50 miles, runs the general store too." Helena filed away the information. If she couldn't continue to Cheyenne right away, perhaps Porterville could use a teacher in the interim. They reached Helena's wagon before mid-morning. Lucas climbed down and immediately went to inspect the broken wheel. Helena stood by, watching as he examined the damage with experienced hands. "This is worse than I thought," he finally said, looking up at her from his crouched position. "The axle's cracked too, must have hit a rock pretty hard." Helena's heart sank. Can it be repaired? Lucas stood, dusting off his hands. Yes, but not quickly. I'll need to make a new wheel and reinforce the axle. Could take a week, maybe more. A week, Helena echoed, dismayed. But I need to get to Cheyenne. I'm expected there. Well, unless you want to try walking the rest of the way, you'll need to be patient, Lucas said, his tone matter of fact rather than unkind. I can get a message to Porterville. If anyone's heading towards Cheyenne, they might be able to carry word that you're delayed. Helena pressed her lips together, calculating her options. I suppose I have no choice. No, you don't, Lucas agreed. He began transferring her belongings from her wagon to his. We'll take what we can now. I'll send Miguel back for the rest. I can pay you for your time and materials, Helena offered, moving to help him. Lucas paused, looking at her directly. I'm not concerned about payment, Miss Turner. Out here, we help each other. It's how we survive. There was something in his eyes that made Helena's breath catch a steadiness, a certainty that she found both intimidating and compelling. Thank you, she said simply. They worked together for the next hour, salvaging what they could from Helena's wagon. As they were finishing, Lucas suddenly stiffened, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Get in the wagon, he said quietly, his hand moving to the rifle propped against the driver's seat. What's wrong? Helena asked, alarmed by his change in demeanor. Riders coming. Could be nothing, but better safe than sorry. Helena followed his gaze and saw a small group of horsemen approaching from the south. Who are they? Can't tell yet, Lucas replied, his voice tense, but they're moving with purpose. Helena climbed into the wagon, her heart pounding. Lucas stood his ground, rifle ready but not raised, his posture alert but not overtly threatening. As the riders drew closer, Helena could make out 4 men, all heavily armed. They slowed as they approached, and the leader raised a hand in greeting. Vaughn, he called out. Thought that might be you. Lucas relaxed slightly. Sheriff Hawkins, what brings you out this way? The sheriff, a weathered man with a thick mustache, reined in his horse. Looking for a group that hit the stagecoach yesterday. 3 men headed east. His gaze shifted to Helena in the wagon. Madam. Helena nodded politely, relief washing over her that these were lawmen, not bandits. Haven't seen anyone, Lucas said. This lady's wagon broke down. I'm helping her get it back to my place for repairs. Sheriff Hawkins nodded. Keep an eye out. They're armed and desperate. He glanced at Helena again. You be careful, madam. These aren't times for a woman to be traveling alone. I'm quite safe with Mr. Vaughn, Helena replied, surprising herself with her confidence in that statement. The sheriff touched his hat. We'll be on our way then. Vaughn, if you see anything suspicious, fire 3 shots. We'll be patrolling the area for a few days. Will do, Lucas agreed, watching as the sheriff and his deputies rode off. Once they were gone, Lucas turned to Helena. Stagecoach robberies are getting more common. The railroads made the stage routes less traveled, which makes them easier targets. Helena shivered despite the growing heat of the day. Is it always this dangerous out here? Lucas's expression softened slightly. It can be. But it's also a place where you can build something that's truly yours. He climbed up onto the wagon seat. Come on, let's get back before it gets too hot. The return journey was quieter, both of them lost in their thoughts. Helena found herself studying Lucas's profile as he drove, noting the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, the set of his jaw that spoke of determination, the lines around his eyes that hinted at both hardship and laughter. You're staring, Lucas said without looking at her. Helena flushed. I was just thinking. About what? About how different this is from Boston, she replied, which was partially true. Lucas glanced at her then. Having regrets about coming west, Helena considered the question seriously. No, she finally said. It's challenging, certainly, and not what I expected, but no regrets. Lucas nodded, seeming to approve of her answer. Good, regrets don't serve much purpose out here. You have any? Helena asked. Regrets, I mean. Lucas was quiet for so long that Helena thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was low. A few, but I've learned to live with them. They reached the ranch by early afternoon. Miguel was waiting for them, and Lucas quickly explained the situation with Helena's wagon. The foreman nodded and immediately set off with a second wagon to retrieve the rest of Helena's belongings. I should go with him, Helena said, watching Miguel leave. No need, Lucas replied. Miguel's trustworthy and it'll be faster if he goes alone. He gestured toward the house. Come on. You must be hungry and we need to figure out where you'll stay while your wagon's being repaired. I assumed I would stay in the room you provided last night, Helena said, confused. Lucas shook his head. That won't do for a week or more. People will talk. People, Helena raised an eyebrow. We're miles from anywhere. Word travels fast, even out here, Lucas said. There's a small cabin about a quarter-mile north of the main house. It's where my previous foreman lived before Miguel. It's simple but sound. You'll have more privacy there. Helena was touched by his concern for her reputation. Thank you, that's very considerate. Lucas shrugged off her gratitude. It's nothing, just the proper thing to do. They entered the house, and Lucas set about preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. Helena insisted on helping, and soon they had established a comfortable rhythm, working side by side in the small kitchen. You mentioned you're from Pennsylvania originally, Helena said as they ate. What brought you all the way to Wyoming? Lucas took a sip of coffee before answering. After the war, I worked on the railroad for a while, made my way west with the tracks, saved every penny. When I got to Laramie, I heard about land for sale out here. It was rough country, but the price was right. He gestured around them. Built this place with my own hands. Started with just the cabin you'll be staying in, actually. That's impressive, Helena said sincerely. Lucas studied her face as if checking for signs of mockery. Finding none, he continued. What about you? What makes a Boston schoolteacher decide to come to Wyoming? Helena set down her fork. I suppose I was looking for something new, something that was entirely mine. In Boston, I was always someone's daughter, someone's niece, someone's disappointing spinster cousin. Lucas's lips quirked in a small smile. Disappointing how? I'm 24 and unmarried, for one, Helena said dryly. And I prefer books to ballrooms. I speak my mind too freely. I wanted to teach in the poorer districts where education was most needed, rather than at some finishing school for wealthy girls. So you decided to come to the wildest part of the country instead, Helena smiled. It sounds foolish when you put it that way. Not foolish, Lucas said, his eyes meeting hers. Brave. The word hung between them, creating a moment of connection that made Helena's cheeks warm. She looked away first, focusing on her plate. After we eat, I'll show you to the cabin, Lucas said, breaking the silence. It'll need some cleaning, but it's sturdy and dry. True to his word, after the meal, Lucas led Helena along a narrow path through a stand of cottonwood trees to a small log cabin. It was indeed sturdy-looking, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. It's not been used in a while, Lucas said, pushing open the door. But the roof's sound. The interior was dusty but otherwise in good condition. There was a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner and a few shelves built into the walls. A small window on each wall would provide light and air. It's perfect, Helena said, stepping inside. Thank you. Lucas looked pleased. There's a pump out back for water. I'll bring you some firewood and a lantern. The nights get cool, even in summer. Helena moved to the window, looking out at the view of the plains stretching toward distant mountains. It's beautiful here, she said softly. When Lucas didn't respond, she turned to find him watching her with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "Nothing. Just, you're not what I expected when I saw a woman leading 2 horses toward my ranch yesterday. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Helena asked, curious. Lucas's mouth curved in a small smile. "I'm still deciding." The next few days fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. In the mornings, Helena would wake at dawn, fetch water from the pump, and prepare a simple breakfast on the small stove in her cabin. Then she would walk to the main ranch house where Lucas would already be working on repairing her wagon wheel or tending to ranch business. Despite her initial concerns about being idle, Helena quickly found ways to make herself useful. She organized Lucas's disorderly bookkeeping, helped Consuela with cooking when the woman came to the main house, and even began teaching Miguel's 8-year-old son, Tomás, to read English better. Lucas observed her integration into ranch life with quiet amusement. "You certainly don't sit still, do you?" he commented on the 4th day, finding her cleaning and organizing his neglected bookshelf. Helena looked up, a smudge of dust on her cheek. "I can't help it. I like to be useful." "Is that why you became a teacher?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Helena considered the question. "Partly. I also believe that education is the key to changing lives. When I was 16, I volunteered at a charity school in Boston. I saw children who had never been given a chance suddenly light up when they realized they could read a word or solve a problem." She smiled at the memory. "I knew then what I wanted to do with my life." Lucas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Noble cause." "What about you?" Helena asked, setting aside the book she'd been holding. "Why ranching?" Lucas moved to the window, looking out at his land. "I like the freedom of it. The honest work. A man knows where he stands with cattle. They don't lie or scheme or betray." There was a bitterness in his voice that made Helena wonder what experiences had shaped his worldview. "You don't trust people much, do you?" she asked gently. Lucas turned back to her, his expression guarded. "I trust some people. Miguel, Doc Porter in town, a few others." "Not many women, though, I'd wager," Helena said, intuiting the source of some of his reserve. A shadow crossed Lucas's face. "No, not many." Before Helena could probe further, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Lucas moved quickly to the door, his hand instinctively checking for the revolver he wore at his hip. "Stay inside," he instructed Helena, stepping onto the porch. Concerned, Helena moved to the window, watching as 3 riders approached the ranch. They weren't the sheriff and his deputies, and they didn't have the look of neighboring ranchers coming for a friendly visit. Lucas stood his ground on the porch, his posture alert but not overtly hostile. As the men drew closer, Helena could see they were rough-looking, unshaven, their clothes dirty from the trail. "Afternoon," the leader called out, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek. "Looking for water and maybe some food, been riding hard." "Pump's over there," Lucas said, gesturing to the water pump near the corral. "You can water your horses and fill your canteens. Where you headed?" The men exchanged glances. "East," the leader replied vaguely. "Coming from Laramie." Lucas nodded, but Helena could see the tension in his shoulders. "You can get water, but then you'll need to move on. I'm not running away station." The scarred man's expression hardened, but he nodded. "Fair enough. Appreciate the water." The men dismounted and led their horses to the pump. Helena watched as Lucas remained on the porch, one hand casually resting near his gun. Something about these men made her uneasy, and she could tell Lucas felt the same. As the men filled their canteens, the leader kept glancing toward the house. Helena stepped back from the window, not wanting to be seen. "Saw the sheriff and his men riding around yesterday," the scarred man commented, his tone too casual. "They looking for someone. Stagecoach robbers, Lucas replied evenly. Hit a coach a few days back, killed the driver. The men exchanged looks again. That's so, shame about the driver. Yeah, Lucas agreed, his gaze steady. Sheriff said they were heading east, 3 men. The implication hung in the air. The scarred man stiffened, then forced a laugh. Well, hope they catch him. We'll be on our way now. Thanks for the water. They mounted quickly, and the leader tipped his hat in a mocking gesture. Nice place you got here. Might stop by again sometime. I wouldn't advise it, Lucas said, his voice hard. The men rode off, and Lucas remained on the porch until they were out of sight. When he came back inside, his expression was grim. Those were the stagecoach robbers, weren't they? Helena asked quietly. Lucas nodded. Almost certainly. They matched the description Sheriff Hawkins gave me. He moved to the window, watching the direction they'd gone. They'll be back. Fear gripped Helena's heart. How do you know? They were sizing up the place, looking for weaknesses. He turned to her, his expression grave. I need to get word to the sheriff. They could return as early as tonight. What should we do? Helena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Lucas considered for a moment. Miguel and his family need to come up to the main house. You too. No one stays alone tonight. I can help, Helena offered. I may not be able to shoot, but I can reload or keep watch. Lucas looked surprised, then smiled slightly. I believe you would. He checked his pocket watch. It's nearly noon. I'll ride to Porterville to find the sheriff. Should be back before sundown. While I'm gone, stay with Consuela and help her prepare the house. Miguel will keep watch. Helena nodded, her fear giving way to determination. Be careful. Lucas paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Always am. After Lucas left, the ranch became a flurry of activity. Miguel brought his wife and son to the main house, and they began preparing for a possible attack. Windows were reinforced, weapons were checked and positioned strategically, and water buckets were filled in case of fire. Helena worked alongside Consuela, the older woman's quiet efficiency calming her nerves. Lucas is a good man, Consuela said as they prepared food. Very brave, very smart. He will keep us safe. You've worked for him long, Helena asked. Consuela nodded. 5 years. Since Miguel became foreman, Lucas saved my husband's life once when rustlers attacked. He took a bullet meant for Miguel. She crossed herself. We owe him everything. This new information deepened Helena's growing respect for the rancher. There was so much more to Lucas Vaughn than his gruff exterior suggested. As the afternoon wore on, Helena found herself constantly glancing out the window, watching for Lucas's return. The sun was beginning to set when she finally spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon. Relief flooded through her until she realized there were multiple riders approaching. Miguel, she called out. Riders coming. The foreman appeared at her side, rifle in hand. He studied the approaching group, then relaxed. It's the boss, and Sheriff Hawkins. Sure enough, as they drew closer, Helena could make out Lucas riding alongside the sheriff and 4 deputies. They dismounted in front of the house, and Lucas immediately sought her out as he entered. Everything all right here? He asked, his eyes scanning her face. Yes, Helena assured him. We've been preparing as you suggested. Lucas nodded, then turned to Sheriff Hawkins, who had followed him in. Sheriff, this is Miss Helena Turner, the lady I mentioned whose wagon broke down. The sheriff tipped his hat. Madam, sorry about your wagon, and sorrier still that you found yourself in the middle of this business. It's hardly anyone's fault but the robbers, Helena replied. I'm just grateful for Mr. Vaughn's hospitality and protection. Sheriff Hawkins nodded approvingly. You found yourself a good man to be stranded with, that's certain. Lucas Vaughn's one of the most respected ranchers in the county. Lucas looked uncomfortable with the praise. Let's focus on the matter at hand, Sheriff. If those men return, They'll likely come after dark." The sheriff agreed, and they gathered around the table to discuss strategy. Helena listened as Lucas outlined his plan to position men around the property, creating a defensive perimeter that would allow them to spot the outlaws before they could get close to the house. "Miss Turner," the sheriff said, turning to her, "I'd suggest you stay inside with Mrs. Rodriguez and the boy. If there's trouble, get to the root cellar. It's the safest place." Helena nodded, though the thought of hiding while others risked their lives didn't sit well with her. "I understand." As darkness fell, the men took their positions. Lucas would be stationed on the porch, with a clear view of the approach to the ranch. Before he headed out, he pulled Helena aside. "If anything happens to me," he said quietly, "there's a strong box under the floorboards in my bedroom. The key is in the hollow leg of the bedside table. It contains enough money to get you to Cheyenne and set yourself up properly." Helena stared at him, dismayed. "Nothing is going to happen to you." Lucas's expression was solemn. "Just in case, promise me you'll remember." "I promise," Helena said, her throat tight. "But you must promise to be careful." Lucas reached out hesitantly, then seemed to think better of it and dropped his hand. "I will. Stay safe, Helena." It was the first time he had used her first name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart beat faster. "You too, Lucas." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked out the door, rifle in hand. The night stretched on endlessly. Helena sat with Consuela and Tomás in the kitchen, the lamps turned low. The boy had fallen asleep on his mother's lap, but the two women remained awake, alert to every sound. "He likes you," Consuela said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. Helena looked up in surprise. "Who?" Consuela smiled knowingly. "Lucas. I have not seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you in all the years I have known him." Helena felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure you're mistaken. He's simply being kind to a stranded traveler." "Lucas is fair to everyone," Consuela replied, "but kindness, that he saves for few people, and the way he watches you when he thinks no one is looking." She shook her head. "No, I am not mistaken." Before Helena could respond, the crack of a rifle shot split the night air, followed immediately by several more. Consuela clutched her son closer, whispering a prayer, while Helena moved to the window, trying to see what was happening. Flashes of gunfire illuminated the darkness around the ranch. She could make out shadowy figures moving between buildings, and her heart raced as she searched for any sign of Lucas. "Get away from the window," Consuela hissed. "It is not safe." Helena reluctantly stepped back, her hands trembling. The gunfire continued sporadically for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, suddenly, silence fell. The three of them huddled in the kitchen, straining to hear any indication of what had happened. The sound of boots on the porch made them all freeze until Lucas's voice called out, "It's me. It's over." Helena rushed to unlock the door. Lucas stood there, a cut on his forehead bleeding slightly but otherwise appearing unharmed. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him in relief. "You're all right," she breathed, feeling his strong arms hesitantly encircle her. "I'm fine," he assured her, his voice rough with emotion. "Everyone's fine. Sheriff got one of them, the other two fled. They won't be coming back." Helena stepped back, suddenly aware of her impulsive action. "I'm sorry, I was just relieved." Lucas's eyes were warm as they met hers. "No need to apologize." Consuela cleared her throat meaningfully behind them, and Helena moved aside to let Lucas enter the house. Sheriff Hawkins and the deputies followed, their expressions triumphant. "Got the leader," the sheriff announced. "The one with the scar." The other two ran like rabbits when they saw him fall. He nodded to Helena and Consuela. "You ladies all right?" "Yes, thank you," Helena replied. "Is anyone hurt?" "Deputy Wilson took a bullet to the arm," the sheriff said. Nothing serious. Doc Porter's patching him up now. Helena hadn't even noticed the doctor's arrival. She turned to Lucas questioningly. Doc rode in with the sheriff, Lucas explained. Figured we might need him. Smart thinking, Helena said. The night gradually calmed as the excitement wore down. The outlaws' bodies were removed, the injured deputy was tended to, and plans were made for the sheriff and his men to leave at first light. Miguel took his family back to their cabin, now that the danger had passed. Helena found herself alone with Lucas in the kitchen as the house finally quieted. He was sitting at the table, allowing her to clean the cut on his forehead. "It's just a graze," he protested mildly as she dabbed at it with a cloth. "Still needs cleaning," Helena insisted. "Hold still." Lucas complied, watching her face as she worked. "You were brave tonight," he said quietly. Helena smiled. "I didn't do anything. You were the brave one. You didn't panic. Most city folk would have." "Perhaps I'm adapting to frontier life more quickly than I thought," Helena suggested. Lucas caught her hand as she finished with the cloth. "Perhaps you are." Their eyes met, and Helena felt something shift between them. Lucas released her hand slowly, his fingers trailing against hers. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." "I should be thanking you," Helena replied. "You've risked so much to help a stranger." Lucas's expression softened. "You're not a stranger anymore, Helena." The way he said her name made her heart flutter. "No, I suppose I'm not." They stayed up talking long into the night, sharing stories from their pasts that Helena suspected Lucas had never told anyone else. He spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the war, and the loss of his parents to influenza shortly after he returned home. Helena told him about growing up in Boston society, the death of her father when she was 12, and her mother's subsequent remarriage to a man who had little interest in his stepdaughter. "So that's why you came west," Lucas said as dawn began to lighten the sky outside. "To find a place where you truly belonged." Helena nodded, surprised by his insight. "Yes, exactly that." Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. "I hope you find it." Helena looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "I think I might be closer than I expected." The next week passed in a blur of activity. Lucas worked diligently on repairing Helena's wagon, crafting a new wheel and reinforcing the axle. Helena divided her time between helping around the ranch and teaching Tomas, who proved to be a bright and eager student. News of the shootout spread quickly, and neighbors from miles around rode in to check on Lucas and hear the story firsthand. Helena was introduced to each visitor, and she couldn't help but notice how Lucas's hand would often find the small of her back as he presented her, his voice carrying a hint of pride. "Miss Turner is a schoolteacher," he would say, "on her way to Cheyenne to start a school there." Each time he said it, Helena felt a twinge of sadness. Her wagon was nearly repaired now, and soon she would continue her journey. The thought of leaving Lucas and the ranch that had begun to feel like home troubled her more than she cared to admit. One evening, about 10 days after her arrival, Helena was sitting on the porch of her cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up to see Lucas walking toward her, his expression unusually hesitant. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space beside her on the small bench. "Of course," Helena replied, moving slightly to make room. Lucas sat down, his shoulder just brushing against hers. "It's a beautiful evening." "It is," Helena agreed. "I've come to love these Wyoming sunsets." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the colors deepened across the sky. "Your wagon will be ready tomorrow," Lucas finally said, his voice carefully neutral. Helena's heart sank despite her efforts to remain practical. "That's wonderful news. You've worked so hard on it." You'll be able to reach Cheyenne in 3 days if the weather holds, Lucas continued. I've drawn you a map showing the safest route. Thank you, Helena said softly, for everything you've done. Lucas turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. Will you write? Let me know you arrived safely, Helena smiled, touched by his concern. Of course I will. Lucas nodded, then fell silent again. There was tension in his shoulders as if he were wrestling with something internally. Lucas, Helena began hesitantly, is everything all right? He took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said when you first arrived, about fate bringing you here. You were the one who said that, Helena reminded him gently. Was I? Lucas looked surprised, then shook his head with a small smile. I suppose I was, and I was right. Helena waited, her heart beating faster. I've been alone a long time, Lucas continued. By choice, mostly. After the war, after losing my parents, it seemed easier not to get too close to people. He looked out at the darkening sky. But then your wagon broke down outside my ranch and everything changed. Helena's breath caught in her throat. Changed how? Lucas turned to her, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. I find myself not wanting you to go to Cheyenne. I find myself hoping you might consider staying. Staying, Helena echoed, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Yes, Lucas said, his voice gaining confidence. Porterville needs a teacher just as much as Cheyenne does. The children have to ride 10 miles to the school in the next county. Parents have been talking about starting a school here for years. Hope flared in Helena's chest. Are you suggesting I establish a school in Porterville instead? I'm suggesting, Lucas said slowly, taking her hand in his, that you consider making a home here. With me. Helena stared at him, speechless. I know it's sudden, Lucas continued quickly. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. When you're near, everything seems brighter somehow, better. His grip on her hand tightened. I'm not asking for an answer right away, just asking you to think about it. Helena's mind was racing. Was this why she had felt so at home here? Was this why the thought of continuing to Cheyenne had become increasingly daunting? Lucas, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, he assured her. Your wagon will be ready, and you're free to go on to Cheyenne as planned. I just wanted you to know how I feel, and that there's a place for you here if you want it. Helena looked at their joined hands, then up at the stars that had begun to appear in the darkening sky. She thought about the life she had envisioned for herself in Cheyenne, teaching, independence, a fresh start. And then she thought about what life might be like here, with Lucas, in this place that already felt like home. I don't need time to think about it, she said finally, turning to meet his gaze. Lucas's expression was guarded, as if preparing himself for rejection. Helena smiled, squeezing his hand. The wagon broke for a reason, Lucas. Call it fate or providence or simple chance, but I'm glad it did. Hope dawned in Lucas's eyes. Does that mean? It means I'd like to stay, Helena said simply. I'd like to start a school in Porterville and see where this leads. She gestured between them. Lucas's face broke into the most radiant smile Helena had ever seen. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I promise you won't regret it. I know I won't, Helena replied softly. As the last light faded from the sky, Lucas hesitantly leaned toward her. Helena met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Helena knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. The summer turned to fall, and Helena found herself busier than she had ever been in Boston. With Lucas's help, she had established a small school in Porterville, converting an unused storeroom behind the general store into a classroom. 15 children from the surrounding farms and ranches attended regularly, their ages ranging from 6 to 16. Helena taught them all, adapting her lessons to each child's level and needs. Doc Porter had donated medical texts for the older students interested in science, while Lucas contributed history books and literature from his own collection. The community had rallied around the school, with parents donating lumber to build desks and benches, and taking turns providing midday meals for the children. Helena stayed in the cabin on Lucas's property, maintaining propriety despite their deepening relationship. 3 evenings a week, she would dine at the main house with Lucas, often joined by Miguel and Consuela. On Sundays after church, Lucas would take her for long rides across the ranch, showing her his favorite spots: a hidden valley where wildflowers bloomed in profusion, a small lake fed by mountain springs, ancient rock formations that told the story of the land long before humans arrived. It was on one such Sunday in early October that Lucas brought her to a rolling hillside overlooking the ranch. The aspen trees were ablaze with golden leaves, and the air had the crisp bite of approaching winter. "I love this spot," Lucas said as they dismounted. "You can see almost the whole ranch from here." Helena stood beside him, taking in the view. The main house and outbuildings looked like toys from this distance, nestled in the vast landscape of the plains. "It's beautiful," she said, leaning slightly against his side. Over the past months, they had grown more comfortable with such casual contact, though Lucas remained respectfully restrained. "I came up here a lot during my first winter," Lucas told her, his arm slipping around her waist. "When I was living in that little cabin, trying to build something from nothing, sometimes I'd stand here for hours, just planning what I would do with the land, imagining what it could become." Helena looked up at him, touched by his willingness to share such personal memories. "And now look at it. You've built something remarkable." Lucas turned to her, his expression serious. "I have, but it's not complete yet." Helena tilted her head questioningly. "What else do you plan to build?" Instead of answering directly, Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Helena's breath caught as he dropped to one knee before her. "Helena Turner," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and laughter back into my world, and I can't imagine going forward without you by my side." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Helena's eyes as happiness welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." Lucas's face broke into a joyful smile as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her heart race. When they finally broke apart, Helena looked down at the ring sparkling on her finger. "It's beautiful. It was my mother's," Lucas explained. "I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to." He touched her cheek gently. "I never thought I'd find her out here in Wyoming territory." Helena leaned into his touch. "And I never thought I'd find love because a wagon wheel broke outside a stranger's ranch." Lucas laughed, the sound echoing across the hillside. "Then fate brought you here," he said, repeating the words he'd spoken on the day they met. "And I'm never leaving," Helena replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him again. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Porterville. The entire community turned out for the ceremony, with Sheriff Hawkins serving as Lucas's best man and Consuela standing up for Helena. Even some of Helena's students participated, the younger ones scattering wildflower petals along the aisle, the older ones playing music on borrowed instruments. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard and lanterns hung from trees. There was dancing and feasting late into the night, with neighbors who had ridden for hours to attend not departing until well after midnight. When the last guests had gone, Lucas swept Helena into his arms and carried her across the threshold of the main house, their house now, both of them laughing with joy and anticipation. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vaughn," Lucas said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. Helena wrapped her arms around his neck. "I've felt at home since the day I arrived, Mr. Vaughn." Life settled into a new pattern after their marriage. Helena continued teaching at the school in Porterville, while also taking on more responsibilities at the ranch. She learned to ride better under Lucas's patient instruction, to manage the household accounts, and even to help during the spring calving season. Lucas, for his part, found time to assist with special projects at the school, teaching the older boys practical skills like woodworking and basic surveying. He expanded the ranch's operations, breeding better stock and increasing their herd, with an eye toward building a legacy that would last. Their first Christmas together was marked by a fierce blizzard that kept them housebound for 3 days. They made the most of their isolation, sharing stories by the fire, planning for the future, and expressing their love for each other in the intimacy of their bedroom. As spring arrived, Helena began to suspect a new blessing was on its way. When Doc Porter confirmed she was expecting a child in late autumn, Lucas's joy knew no bounds. He immediately began plans for a nursery, converting a spare room next to their bedroom and crafting a cradle with his own hands. "Do you want a boy or a girl?" Helena asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained since their courting days. Lucas considered the question seriously. "Healthy," he finally said. "That's all that matters. Though I wouldn't mind a little girl with your eyes and spirit." Helena smiled, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I was thinking a boy with your strength and integrity would be wonderful." "Either way," Lucas said, pulling her closer, "this child will be loved beyond measure." Their daughter, Elizabeth Rose Vaughn, was born on a crisp November evening in 1874, arriving with a lusty cry that immediately captured her father's heart. Lucas held his newborn child with awe, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered, gazing from the tiny bundle to his exhausted but radiant wife. "Just like her mother." Helena reached out to touch Lucas's face. "She has your chin, and I think she'll have your dark hair." Doc Porter, who had assisted with the birth, smiled at the new family. "She's strong and healthy. You did well, Mrs. Vaughn." Life changed again with Elizabeth's arrival. Helena temporarily stepped back from teaching full-time, arranging for a young woman from a neighboring town to take over most of her duties while she focused on motherhood. The school continued to thrive, eventually moving into a proper building constructed by the community the following spring. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, often carrying Elizabeth with him around the ranch in a sling Consuela had made, explaining the workings of the ranch to the infant as if she could understand every word. Helena would watch them from the window sometimes, her heart full to bursting with love for the family they had created. As Elizabeth grew, so did the Vaughn ranch and its prosperity. Lucas's careful management and forward-thinking approaches to cattle breeding made them one of the most successful operations in the county. Helena returned to teaching part-time when Elizabeth was 2, bringing her daughter with her to the schoolhouse where the older girls would take turns watching her during lessons. Their family expanded again when Helena gave birth to twin boys, James and William, in the summer of 1877. Lucas was even more prepared the second time around, though the discovery that they were expecting twins had been a shock to both parents. 3 children under 4, Helena said one night as they collapsed into bed after getting all 3 children to sleep. If someone had told me 3 years ago that this would be my life, I never would have believed them. Lucas pulled her into his arms. Regrets? He asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. Helena nestled against his chest. Not a single one. Though I might need to hire some help at the school if we keep expanding our family at this rate. Lucas laughed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I don't think we'll be needing to worry about that anytime soon. 3 is enough of a handful for now. Life wasn't always easy. There were hard years when drought threatened the cattle, winters when blizzards isolated them for weeks, and the usual challenges of raising spirited children. But through it all, Lucas and Helena's bond only strengthened, their partnership proving resilient against whatever hardships came their way. In the spring of 1880, almost 6 years after Helena's wagon had broken down outside Lucas's ranch, they stood together on the hillside where he had proposed, watching their children play among the wildflowers. Elizabeth, now 5, was serious and thoughtful like her father, while the 3-year-old twins were bundles of energy, constantly racing and tumbling through the grass. I've been thinking, Lucas said, his arm around Helena's waist. About fate. Helena leaned her head against his shoulder. Have you now? That's not like you. I'm serious, Lucas said, though he was smiling. If your wagon wheel hadn't broken that day, if you'd made it all the way to Cheyenne as planned, I would have missed out on the greatest happiness of my life, Helena finished for him, turning to face him fully. But it did break, and fate did bring me here, just like you said. Lucas brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch still sending a thrill through her after all these years. I think I've been in love with you since that first day, when you stood in my yard with dirt on your face and determination in your eyes. It took me a little longer, Helena admitted with a smile. At least until you started defending my honor against stagecoach robbers. Lucas laughed, then grew serious again. I want you to know something. In all these years, through everything we've faced together, I've never once doubted that you were meant to be here with me. Helena stood on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring all her love into the gesture. Neither have I, my love. Not for a single moment. As they turned to watch their children, Helena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place, this life. A broken wagon wheel, a chance encounter with a solemn rancher, and the courage to follow her heart had given her everything she'd ever wanted and more. Some might call it luck or coincidence. But standing there with Lucas's arm around her and their children playing nearby, Helena knew the truth. It was fate, pure and simple, and she would be forever grateful that it had brought her home.